Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we're here for another poetry discussion, a poetry discussion that comes to us from Emily Dickinson, and in as much it will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one, obviously the poetry discussion playlist, creeping ever nearer the 250 discussions mark, but also the Emily Dickinson playlist, which is now over 60 poetry discussions large. The poem in question today is As Imperceptibly as Grief. This is a poem that is, I think, one of the poems from Emily Dickinson that you have to be receptive to interpret. That you can't go and say, okay, boom, there is the subject, boom, there is the point. You can't really nail it down. I think it's one that you have to really sort of say, there might not be a pinpoint where you can say, oh, this is what we're talking about here, but you have to instead receive the message writ large and then possibly reread the poem. Obviously, with Emily Dickinson, rereading the poem is always suggestible because there are words, there are phrases, there are turns of meaning that can be very difficult and very pressing in Emily Dickinson's poetry. But anyway, this is how the poem reads. As imperceptibly as grief, the summer lapsed away, too imperceptible at last to seem like perfidy. A quietness distilled as twilight long begun, or nature spending with herself sequestered afternoon. The dusk drew earlier in, the morning foreign shone, a courteous yet harrowing grace, as guest who would be gone, and thus without a wing or service of a keel, our summer made her light escape into the beautiful. So I think we have to start where we start. As imperceptibly as grief. So we have here the word grief. Okay. The summer lapsed away. So we have then the word summer. We have these two words, grief and summer, married in the poem. And then we have this, lapsed away. So what are we talking about here? As imperceptibly as grief, the summer lapsed away. Imperceptibly then goes on to describe the lapsing away. So the summer and the grief are married. These two things are the same, grief and summer. Their imperceptibility, the sort of lithe nature with which they disappear, is what is to be assessed by the poem. So grief. We'll start with grief. The grief that one may feel upon losing a loved one. It's devastating at first. It is too much to bear when it happens. And as time moves on, we learn to incorporate that grief into some little compartment of ourself. We don't notice this happening. We don't say, okay, I have to tuck that in my breast pocket because while and whereas I will never forget that, I will have to keep living days. I will have to keep going to work. I will have to keep raising my children. I will have to keep making dinner. I will have to keep eating and waking up. I will have to keep doing these things. So that grief will have to be tucked away in my pocket. Summer is the same way. Once it hits, just like grief, it's too much to bear. That heat is so heavy. It makes everything more difficult. And then as time goes on, your body grows accustomed to the heat. And then, as the days grow shorter, as twilight long begun, or nature spending time with herself sequestered afternoon, the dusk drew earlier in. that summer itself imperceptibly passes. We had grown accustomed to the heat. We had grown accustomed to the long days, and we learned to battle it in our own way, tucking away that heat, though we still feel it, into our breast pocket, because we still have to get up, we still have to make dinner, we still have to take care of the kids, we still have to go to work, all of these things we still have to do despite the heat. Okay. Those two things, grief and summer, therefore are married, and the imperceptibility with which they go, the difficulty that we have sensing their leaving, those two are the same. Okay, great. What do we do with this? Where is the symbolic nature here? What are we to make of the poem in light of that? Well, what does it mean? Summer? Who cares about summer? You could say the same thing about the winter. That first snow is murder, right? The first time you step outside and it's negative 12 degrees is murder. You still have to go to work, right? All the same things. You still have to make dinner. You still have to wake up. All of the things are true with every season. So why pick the summer? Well, at least all those things are true with summer and winter. Maybe the fall and the spring are less heavy on us. The more temperate month, or the more temperate seasons. So why do we mention the summer here? Well, what does the summer symbolize when it comes to time? Because what we're really doing here is we're saying that time is sort of overarching both of these things. And as time passes, little by little, you're not the same. Little by little, everything changes. Little by little, what it is to be you is different. You didn't used to like strawberries, then you did. You didn't used to read the news, and then you did. Little changes happen in you, and they add up until a decade later, you're not really the same person you used to be. You used to go see Marvel movies, and now you don't. All of these things, little things, bit by bit, add up to change you. The summer represents the sort of meat of our lives. The summer of your seasons, that is the summer where you do all of the work. The summer of your life is the meat of existence. So here we have Emily Dickinson saying, look, that grief that you feel, maybe you lost a loved one, maybe you were broken up with, maybe you had to uproot and move, maybe you lost your job, whatever that grief is, that big grief that weighs on you, because there's always something, there's always one part of life that is stricken with grief, right? If you're thinking hard enough, there is. Maybe you don't, maybe you have tucked it away in that breast pocket so well you don't feel it. It's still there. It's still wriggling around inside you. So, that grief is the same as the meat of your life, as your prime, where you are the strongest, where you are the hardest working. Those two things, they are the same. They are linked in this way. The imperceptibility with which they will leave you. If you are finding this poem in your prime, fret not, you too will soon be getting weaker. Your days too will soon be getting shorter. Your life too is drawing to something of a close. And thus, without a wing or service of a keel, our summer made her light escape into the beautiful. Just the same as that grief will leave largely, but be maintained somewhere inside you, making you better, so too will the grief of you pass on to others until they incorporate it into their self and make it into something beautiful. The grief that we feel, the big griefs, when, for example, someone passes, when, for example, we lose a love, that is only wasted if we do not use it to make ourself better, to make the self improve. If we do not do that, then the grief that we go through is wasted. And so too, the memory of us could be wasted. I think that is what this poem is saying very quietly, almost imperceptibly. That is where Emily Dickinson is going with this poem. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. I have poetry discussions on the channel every Monday, at least. There are multiple videos a week here on the channel, so if you find yourself here by chance but not design, the literature is the only thing that I talk about here, so consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more. And if you enjoy what I do here and want to help me out, hitting the like button tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers so that they can maybe find some Emily Dickinson as well.